How's everyone doing this afternoon as we come to the conclusion of the conference here? All right, we're about to get going. I wandered out to the hallway to make sure anyone that wanted to could come in and see it. This last talk I think you'll find to be a bit different and oriented on being fun with some hopefully thoughtful consideration along the way. So I'll get going. The talk is entitled Summoning the Demon, AI, and the Future of Life on Earth. It's about as dramatic as you can possibly be. I can't claim credit, though, for the phrase, because that's Mr. Musk. So he was in an interview in the symposium back in 2014, and it was a comment that he made with artificial intelligence, we're summoning the demon. And probably many of you have seen his many comments along the way. He's probably the world's biggest I guess, critic of the downside of AI, even though he is completely committed to it himself. And he, along with Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking, there's quite a few luminaries out there that are blowing the warning horn to some degree on that. And there are also many people out there who are saying, no, I don't buy that. I think it's all good. Mark Zuckerberg is notable for one of those. But as we go on here, I'm using my iPhone as a remote, and periodically it will stop connecting. So give me 1 second, and otherwise I'll be wandering over here for every time. And we may just have to do that. So I'll just wander over here since it's not picking it up. And go to the next. So I'm Chris Benson. I am the Chief Scientist for Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning at one of Honeywell's global divisions. We call them strategic business groups, but there are 4 of them around the world, and that's how we divide up. Honeywell is, I think, 73 on the global Fortune 500, and we're kind of divided into these 4 groups. And I used to work for Accenture. I did artificial intelligence delivery when I was there. And I'm also the organizer of the Atlanta Deep Learning Meetup. You'll see down here, do a lot of public speaking on AI topics, do a lot of hands-on architecture at Honeywell. So I both manage the group, but I also lead on the research with our teams there. So it's a very hands-on experience for me. I was introduced to deep learning, which is kind of the basis of AI today, back in 1992, and immediately you should go, we didn't have deep learning in 1992, but we did have neural networks of the day, and that was something that my father and mother actually did, which is kind of unusual because I'm in my late 40s. My mother taught at Tech, and my dad worked at Lockheed, and they did some really innovative stuff. And if you saw some of the other talks that I did today, you'll have seen kind of some of the stuff on how I got into that. So I got a very young introduction, went away for a long time, and then as deep learning rose back, got back into it professionally. And I'm very much a futurist, despite the title of this, and despite some of the things we'll talk about today. I'm very much an optimist. I'm a futurist. I like to see what's possible, and I'm wary of the downside, because there usually can be downsides to things. Been a technologist since I wrote my first Hello World on this. Some of you might recognize that as the original IBM PC. I was 11 when I did that. These days, this is what I work on. It's the world's first AI-specific supercomputer from NVIDIA, and it is designed to do the very highest end on deep learning. It's the same equipment that Facebook's AI team uses. So as we start off on this and get going, I'm inviting you to comment. We have a mic that'll go around. Feel free to challenge me. This is a fun thing that we're doing here. You may not agree with some of what I say. You may not agree with everything I say. And sometimes I'm not entirely sure that I agree with myself on any of this stuff. But it's something I like to think about a lot and have a lot of debates with people about this just for fun. This is not what we're doing at Honeywell during the day when we're doing very pragmatic, hands-on model creation and deploying a software. This is what we do when we go for a beer after work and we're saying, what do you think? And I thought it would be a lot of fun to, after a hard day of pragmatic data science, to just have a nice exit to the day and have some fun. So feel free to challenge me or comment or throw out whatever you want. Just wait for the mic to get to you. So we're going to start with not so natural selection. So humans have reigned on Earth for 50,000 years, back when the cognitive revolution occurred which sort of separated, from a brain perspective, humans from the rest of the animals on the planet. But that will soon end, because someday humans will be replaced as the apex intelligence on the planet Earth. It's a pretty big statement. So what will that mean for humans? So I would say that artificial intelligence will inevitably overtake and eclipse humans' intelligence. And that's a big debatable point. I do that all the time with people. And yes, I did say inevitable, and that's a key to this. So skeptical? Sure, you have a right to be. You should be. But let's be clear what I'm not saying. I'm not suggesting that today's neural networks are going to create a nightmare AI apocalypse. There's a giant gap between today's neural networks and sentient intelligence. A lot of people that argue this like to say that's the basis of their argument, but they're discounting a few things. First of all, it doesn't even bring the polite ones, the nice ones. We have the happy scenarios and we have the not so happy scenarios. And deep learning, which is kind of the basis of modern AI right now, is definitely going through this massive hype cycle. So do you guys recognize, I know a few of you have been in other talks where I talk about this, but do you recognize this curve? It's something that Gartner does with every technology that comes out. It's called the hype cycle, and it has these phases where a new technology comes out, and it's called an innovation trigger, and everyone's like, oh, this is the greatest thing that you've ever seen, it can do anything, and it roars to the top of the peak of inflated expectations. And that's kind of where they're kind of going, this may be not working out. And so it plummets down into the trough of disillusionment. And that's the point where they're saying, we thought that was the great thing, and our expectations weren't met, and we invested time and money and effort and resources, and it didn't pan out. And people start to pull back a little bit. But then the pragmatic, realistic people with the technology come along and say, wait a minute, it was never realistic to meet those expectations. This is what it can really do. And then it kind of starts the normal curve of its life cycle where it becomes a useful tool, and it moves up, and eventually with most technologies, it'll fade out as new technologies come out. And every technology that is introduced gets applied to this. And you'll notice that most of the things on here have absolutely, well, the screen's not very clear, have absolutely nothing to do with artificial intelligence. So right now, deep learning is as high on the hype cycle as it could possibly be. And I'm acknowledging that. But going forward, artificial intelligence advances will occur at an exponential rate. And on this graph, you have kind of what we perceive. We look at the future, even if we try not to, we look at the future based on what our past has been. And we kind of analyze, and as humans, and this has been proven over and over again, that we tend to go with linear thinking even when we're trying not to. But if you actually look at the data in hindsight, you find that people in the short term, they tend to expect great things. Oh, and then they're a little bit disappointed when the great things don't happen in the time frame. But over the longer term, you tend to have more advances with technology than you really expected in the long term, because you were limited by your vision, which is your own constraint by the past that you've come from. And so this thing happens where you end up far up the curve in the future than you would have expected. So, still skeptical? I made some pretty big statements right there. Pretty bold statements. Most people I've talked to probably said, I don't buy it, Chris. So, follow the money. And when I say follow the money, I'm saying let's look at just today's AI, and let's say, what's driving that? Well, right now, the amount of investment, both at the startup level and within large corporations like Honeywell, is advancing tremendously. Year by year, it's just shooting up the curve, and you're going to see that going higher and higher going forward. As we do that, that's being caused because the revenues expected with AI value is expected to shoot up exponentially as well. And so, that's a fairly logical business case right there. If huge revenues associated with this technology, why wouldn't I go do that? Why wouldn't I invest in that? And people are really pouring money into that. Google sure did, and they're not doing it right now. This is old news for everybody. With Google, they had spent the first 10 years, this past 10 years, kind of doing mobile first and really focusing on that. And I've talked about that in some of the other conversations we've had today. But they got to pass that. Mobile first is no longer what we should be talking about. If you're still worrying about mobile, if you don't have your mobile strategy implemented and well underway, you're behind the curve. Right now, we've gotten there. We have the devices, the edge devices that are able to access the services that we can offer. And so it's really about making those products and services as good as they can be. And so Google went back and said, you know what? We have this great AI technology. It's still developing, and we're going to apply it through all of our products and all of our services. And they've been doing that. And as they did that, other companies, such as Honeywell, have been doing that too. And that literally is the fundamental part of my day job. That's what I do, is I take AI, I look for opportunities within our products and services, and I create new things or enhance existing things. And so at this point, if you're not rethinking everything that you're doing, you're also, from an AI perspective, you're also falling behind the curve. If you wait a few years, your competitors are going to get way out in front of you. There's a lot of money going into this research and development and implementation. China is actively building a $150 billion AI industry. So American companies right now tend to invest millions of dollars if they have sufficient, but in China they're making a long-term bet. It's amazing. They recognize that they can catapult themselves into a much better economic situation by betting on the long term. So they're doing that. I think that's a fantastic strategy on their part. I applaud it. But we're talking billions and billions of dollars every year being funneled into this. So when you look at these technologies and you're looking at today's deep learning capabilities, with the amount of money that we've put into it so far, which in the scheme of things isn't so much, and you look at how much more money is going into this going forward, that's why I would argue that it's not deep learning today that's going to carry us forward. It's what we evolve deep learning today into. And then that'll evolve into something else. And that'll evolve into something else. And it will go faster and faster. So how long to close that gap? Is it 20 years? 200 years? 2,000 years? I didn't specify how long it would take. I never said this was happening next year. I didn't say this was 2020. I said inevitably, meaning somewhere along that timeline it would occur. I just don't know when we're going to reach sentience or superintelligence. Nobody knows that. But it will happen because that exponential technology curve guarantees that it's going to happen eventually. Still skeptical? If I convinced you all, no one's challenging me at all. Oh, go ahead.
So, two things. First of all, you're showing us the graph of height versus drop and subsequent temperate growth.
Yes.
And then another thing that you mentioned is follow the money, which immediately, that curve that you showed us,
Yep.
immediately brings up memories of 2008.
Okay.
Is that intentional?
I hadn't thought of it that way, to be perfectly honest. What I'm saying is I'm acknowledging with the hype graph that there's a lot of AI hype. And this talk is leveraging that, to be perfectly honest, for fun. But I'm also saying that in the real world, the amount of money is exponentially increasing as well going into that. So I'll leave you to decide. Yes, sir.
So this also reminds me back to 1960s, not that I remember that time, but there was a lot of work in AI when they first invented classical symbolic reasoning.
Yep.
They thought that was the end of it. They solved, and they were going to build a general intelligence machine.
Absolutely.
Solution to everything. But
My mother did that at Tech, so.
it completely failed, and around 1970s they realized there are some critical problems with the way they were thinking.
Yes.
So that AI died.
Yes. Well, we've had probably 3 AI winters over the whole course of its history. So the most recent one being roughly 95 to 2005. You might say 2007, kind of when deep learning really started taking off.
Tied to the point to now, so as you know the story, deep learning came out
Yes.
There's a critical problem here. It's not a reasoning machine. It's only a pattern matching system.
I acknowledge that.
We still don't have a key advancement that will take us to
Well, I'm going to take you back, going right back to the beginning. It's not today's deep learning technology that I am proposing will take us to inevitably. I'm saying that there will be evolution, it will be an exponential growth, and I have tremendous confidence in the human race to be able to surge up that growth with enough focus and money poured into it. So I'm agreeing with you, but I still don't think that discounts it in the long run. So I am going to say, if I haven't convinced you as a skeptic about inevitable yet, whether that be 20 years, 200 years, or 2,000 years, which I have no idea which one of those numbers it is, I would argue from this, does anyone here watch Game of Thrones? Yeah. So for those that don't, Jaime Lannister here has gone to Tyrell, and he is offering her poison. And she says, and this is because Jaime's sister and lover, who is not a nice person, managed to do some awful things that were beyond her imagination. She said, I had a failure to imagine. That was my biggest fault, and thus she had to drink the poison. And what I'm saying is that if this thing about inevitably for sentience and superintelligence sounds just too crazy to you to ever happen on any time scale, you're Elena Tyrell. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that someday it's going to happen. So everything will change. So I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, but Atefi Riazi is the Chief Information Technology Officer for the United Nations. And she has these quotes that are pretty interesting, and there's a lot of people that tend to agree with this. I don't think that she stands alone in this. That we need to think about our role as technologists, we need to think about the ramifications, positive and negative, and we need to transform ourselves as innovators. And I think transform ourselves is the most important aspect there. She says, if you look at this, 20 years from now, it's going to be so different. And we hear that a lot, but I don't think we really internalize it. If I go back to that graph that I showed you a few minutes ago about how we see the future, I should do it this way since you're looking, how we see the future versus what actually happens once you've been there. Most people think 20 years out, and I don't think they're being ambitious enough in their thought for what change is. And as a tangent, think back to when the iPhone was released, and let's go just a year before that, and look forward 20 years, 10, 20, well, it's been 10 years, and already we have outstripped anything that we would have expected just before the iPhone release came, and that's just one thing. And so when you look at the AI that's being applied to Google, we take most of it for granted. We can now search for just about anything on the planet. It wasn't long ago that this was Star Trek we were talking about. This was crazy. Not long ago at all. Artificial intelligence is a super intelligent species that is not human. And we humans have reached our limitation. And if we create this, 80% of the labor that humans will do, what are the changes? What are the changes to our social, cultural, and economic concerns? Because this kind of thing, this AI evolution, if we get there on some time scale, eventually, it's going to change who we are fundamentally as a human race. If we get to that point, the way we live our lives will be vastly different. We're already seeing with this very, very, very limited deep learning capability, we're seeing huge changes to our lives right now in 2017, on into next year and the year after. So if you extrapolate out on whatever timeline you want to choose, think what that means. And this is the big point of this conversation. It's all about having a fun, thoughtful conversation, dialogue between us. But I want it to be talked about. Whether I'm right or wrong, it's kind of beside the point. It's a conversation that we need to have. So that's what we're doing right now. We're starting that conversation. So a lot of people agree on this. And some of those people kind of wish they didn't agree and wish they weren't acting on it. So in the geopolitics of the world, you can have actors that you're in favor of, you can have actors that you're not in favor of, but both sides are going to recognize the capabilities that are out there, whether they agree with you fully or not. Mr. Putin on September 1st made a speech at a university in Moscow in which he basically told all his computer scientists, this is the future. The industry leader will rule the world. And that's a motivation that I'm a little bit nervous with, quite honestly. Whoever gets it rules the world. And while we say that, in a broader thing, a lot of ethicists are starting to look at of where AI is going and what's possible going forward. And they're pointing out that right now, it's been a flop in terms of injecting ethics into AI. That conversation about where we're going is being led by me and other people in the industry that are driving toward the products and services. I would argue that I'm pretty thoughtful in this, hence this talk, but not everybody out there is. And so, do you want to be part of that conversation, or do you want to leave it to a few of us to drive that forward? A few of us that have the budget to do that. I would invite everybody into that conversation. So let's talk about jobs. You really can't have a conversation about AI pushing forward in the world without talking about the jobs issue. Everyone talks about that. And before I even leap into that, I was in the UK a few weeks ago, 2 weeks. My wife is British, and at least once a year we spend 2 weeks just traveling from house to house to house, visiting family, friends, and having conversations. I call it 5 sofas and 17 cups of tea a day. So, and as we do that, my sister-in-law's life partner, they're not married, but he is essentially my brother-in-law, very long-term relationship. He's what, I love him to death, but John is what a lot of people would kind of think of as Luddite, very proudly Luddite. He's like, I hate this technology. And we had a big debate a few weeks ago about this. And it was really telling for me that, I'm in my own little AI world, in my AI space here in Atlanta, doing work at Honeywell. And he's off in Essex, which is over to the northeast of London, in a very different world. But AI concerns are really impacting how he's thinking about life. And he is about as far away from being that person that you normally would associate as you could possibly be. It's impacting everybody in terms of thinking about the jobs that are available and what's happening in the world. So the cognitive revolution occurred. I talked about that 50,000 years ago. We had the agricultural revolution, then the industrial, and then the digital, and then right on top of the digital, maybe part of the digital, is the AI revolution, which is changing the fabric of society as we know it. And if you just look back since 2000, and this is kind of an obvious stat, it's not really in dispute. There's a lot more recent stuff that is disputable. We've lost 5 million jobs due to increased productivity, due to automation. And this is where I would challenge certain politicians out there. It's not immigration that's caused that. 88% has been from automation. I'm just going to leave that one alone right there. So many of us probably know who Andrew Ng is. He is one of the thought leaders and most prolific deep learning experts in the world. Amazing guy, Coursera founder, DeepMind at Google. I mean, just amazing guy in what he's done. And I was on a conference call with him. This was, 2 weeks ago? And he was talking to a group of us about this. I was one of many people on the call. It was a fairly large one. But he made this statement on the call. I wrote it down. This isn't something I pulled out of a magazine. I'm like, oh, Andrew said this. Because one of the top minds in the world on deep learning said that to us. And that's pretty amazing. It's an interesting world in which we live, that those of us who are trying to drive this technology forward have to concern ourselves with these larger issues as well. So on the good side is we have new jobs that we can't even imagine that are going to be created in the years ahead. And if you look at each of these revolutions that we talked about a couple of slides back, every one of those revolutions fundamentally changed the way people lived and worked. And the nature of work as they knew it changed forever. And the jobs that they did changed forever, each one of those times. And so that's going to continue to happen. The worry about this revolution is that there may be more jobs lost than created. Don't know, it's a speculation, but I certainly want to acknowledge that that's possible. So it really changes how we have to think about how we add value in the marketplace. And what I tell people all the time, it's what I told John a few weeks ago, is that it puts a burden on us as the human race, is that this evolution of AI, in my view, it's human evolution. AI evolution is human. This is a tool that is a natural extension of us. It is where we go. It is where I think any species would take it as they gain that capability going forward. So, but it creates an issue in that you have to bring the rest of the world along with you as you do this. And there's a range of capability that people have out there. And what this is basically implying is that to get in those jobs, you better be better educated. You need to have a dynamic mind. You need to be able to move on. And, you know, John was a smart guy. But I was saying, you know, he was asking about factory jobs. And we had a very heated conversation about factory jobs at about midnight one night. And he was worried about it. And I pointed out to him that, you know, competition is driving this forward. You know, if you're worrying about jobs lost in a factory from automation, what do you not automate? And I said, well, what happens, John? Because you have competitors out there, and they're going to automate even if you decide not to, and then that's going to start running you out of business over time, and the jobs are lost in the long run. So there's a double-edged sword there on that argument in terms of you can have the same outcome down both paths. It's certainly a possibility. So how do we cope with such massive disruptive change to our society, our culture, and the global economy? So let's talk about the bigger picture of long term. Let's talk about the scary stuff a little bit. Are we going to join the sentient super intelligence collective there? Kind of mixing two movies there, you know. Kind of Star Trek The Next Generation with Back to the Future kind of combined together. Are we going to become one with our AI overlords? If they're part of human evolution, does the AI become us and we become the AI and it's kind of this bio, non-bio conglomerate? Eventually, AI will train itself for ever deepening intelligence and ever greater sentience at some point down the road. Maybe 2,000 years from now. Have no idea. But at some point, AI trains AI trains AI. And so, with the ultimate data set available, the ever-evolving internet, and everything that you have on the internet, data sets, images, you name it, everything, and let's start pushing that out. What is the internet decades, centuries from now? How much data is out there? And what if an artificial intelligence with more intelligence than humans, little typo right there, what if it trains itself for the next AI based on one question? Historically, how have species with greater intellect treated species with lesser intellect? I think it's a fair question. What do you have going in your heads right now? What are you thinking about?
I think he will improve on that and not do the same thing.
I hope you're right. So let's just say for a moment, let's go with that with what's out on the internet right now if you're out searching on that. And let's talk about the good outcome for us. Good boy. Good boy. I have 4 dogs. And actually I don't muzzle them, but yeah, I love my pets. They're wonderful. That's, you know, if you are dealing with an artificial intelligence that is so much more sentient, so much more aware, so much smarter than you, that they can outthink you at every level, no matter what you do. This is not Terminator, where the good guy is still able to outthink the bad guy. They're tough. They're made of steel. They can jump crazy. They can leap out of helicopters, but we're still going to outthink them. No. No. Anything. Think of the little bug on the floor that's running around, and you're looking to trap it or kill it or whatever. We're the bug from an intelligence standpoint, and that AI is that far out in front of us. So if you're thinking about that, this is actually, relatively speaking, in that relationship, that's not a bad outcome. We survive, we are loved. Or what do we do more in a lot of cases? And this was a gentle picture to suggest. I didn't go with many of the others that Google Images suggested because I thought they might be a little bit too strong. Kind of a Matrix-like thing going there, you know? Well, it's a bug. Stomp it. Or the equivalent. So maybe we need to consider that relationship before we actually get to that point in time. How do we want to do that? Because at some point in time, there's going to be some sort of real relationship, as real as the relationship between you and your spouse or your children or whatever, that exists between humans and something else if you buy into inevitability. So, let's talk about some of the benefits now that I've really bummed everybody out. So, we do what? Oh no, I have bots for that. Are we going to segregate ourselves away from the need to be personally productive and live happy, carefree lives? That sounds pretty good. I'd like that outcome. Just kick back. Might be a little bit boring in the long run, but for a few days, I wouldn't mind doing that. So Gardner predicts that by 2025, it's not far down the road, 50% of the population will have virtual personal health assistants for primary care. For a lot of your common day-to-day stuff, you're not going to see a primary care physician. You'll have your virtual assistant. There's some legalities associated with this, obviously. There's some logistical things, but in a lot of cases, you won't need to. You'll have that, and that'll happen more and more. I mean, we all know in healthcare all the vast numbers of things that are happening to the benefit of humans, absolutely to the benefit of humans, and they're happening now, or they're going to be happening in the near future. Detecting, stopping gun violence. So this particular company has a technology where they're using AI to detect gunshots that may be muffled, and they can actually help respond to that, where the AI helps them understand what they're up against early on. That's great. I mean, we certainly have a lot of gun violence. Regardless of what side of the issue you're on, everybody agrees there's a lot of gun violence going on these days. So that's a huge plus to us. Cancer. Right now, Google's DeepMind is able to look right here at skin to identify places that need treatment or not for cancer. And there's all sorts of cancers that where you can apply AI. I've read many, many articles over the last couple of years about this. And another big thing is you combine that with Internet of Things, which we do at Honeywell constantly. And you have things like nanobots that are going into your body. So, to fight cancer, there's real research out there on sending a fleet of nanobots into your body's bloodstream and going and finding cancer cells and killing it. Little microscopic nanobots. That's actually nearly real, meaning it's not too far out from what we're talking about. That's in the realm of possibility at this point in time. So when artificial intelligence inevitably overtakes and eclipses human intelligence, we may have outcomes that are yielding great good and terrible evil. And so whatever may come to pass is up to us, and it's up to us starting right now. And so those of you who have been in either of the other two talks I did today will have already seen this, so I ask for your patience, but for the next couple of minutes, I want to show you something which is a modern, and this is not even state-of-the-art for as far as the U.S. military is concerned, because they had already done it, then they released it, and they're on to bigger and better things. But it's pretty fascinating for those of us who want to see where AI is going, whether it be a military application or a non-military. I just want to talk about the ability. So I'm going to walk you through this, on what you're seeing here. So those are F-18s. And they're flying over the desert in Nevada. And you can find this video, if you do Perdix, the name that was on the front, you can find this video on YouTube. And what they're about to do is they're about to start releasing what will be little dots. It'll be hard to see on the screen, but you'll see little black dots dropping out from underneath the F-18s as they fly along. And after a moment, that's my mouse pointer there, so I'll move it out of the way. We go into a half speed that's zoomed in. Can you see some of those coming out? Do you know what those are? Those are drones. Those are military drones. For right now, they are test drones. They're not armed drones, but that's a trivial distinction. What they're doing here is the drones are the green devices. The red devices are radar-painted targets. They don't exist. The drones are real. They're flying in the desert. The red things are not, and the tester is painting them on radar. This is a self-organizing drone swarm. There's no human being controlling this in terms of their reactions. They have been programmed with deep learning to work together to attack the targets. And so the testers are doing different things with the red dot targets, and the drones in green are reacting alone, by themselves, unguided, to attack the targets. And so they go back and forth, and they separate out. It's nice and even how they attack the targets. Every target has multiple drones attending to it. They make a kind of a crazy sea you'd never saw, but hey, the drones in the sky, they're really flying this right now. They're flying around on the sea and trying to attack it. And they go to a single target. Well, there's a lot of drones. How do they organize? They circle so that any one drone can go in and basically dive bomb the target as they need to. So these drones are fairly sophisticated. And this was done in 2016, the test itself. It wasn't done this year. This was last year. The video was released in January. And in the last year and a half, who knows where they've gone to? I'm not really passing a value judgment. I mean, this is the future of warfare, clearly. It can be air-to-air. It can be battling tanks. It could be anti-personal. There's a bad guy, let's say there's a terrorist, running along, threatening the world, and a bunch of drones about this big go after him. Terrorist probably isn't going to last long. The drones can get anywhere the terrorists can get. It's probably going to be a pretty quick thing. This is where we're going, at least in warfare. And if you extrapolate out, in the short term, there are many uses that you might see for these kinds of technologies in nonviolent scenarios. But actually seeing these drones fly around in the circles and attacking the fictional target kind of brings it home, doesn't it? When you look at that and suddenly realize, if that's what they were doing in 2016 and they're pouring lots of money into this, where are they now? Where is it going? And that's just the F-18s flying off. And that's it. So I'm going to invite questions, conversation, whatever you want. But I want to say first, feel free to connect with me. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn, I accept requests. If you're a vendor that happens to be here, don't solicit me, please. I say that on the profile because I like having conversations, but I get about 30 a day. And so I try to avoid too many of those. And this will, it's not there yet, but this will be on Speaker Deck. That's my account, and you'll see that pop up there, as will any of the other conversations I had today. Any comments, questions? Throw me down, tell me I'm wrong.
I think one of the problems prior with species becoming, you have how do people treat, or how does a species treat a species with lower intelligence?
Yes.
So far, we don't understand the bug we're squishing.
Absolutely.
So maybe we have the ability to shape the future of AI such that it does understand this.
You know, that's really, I have a lot of hope in that exact scenario. And that's one of the reasons I say that requires forethought, which is one of the reasons that this fun talk was certainly fun, wasn't it? No one's bummed out, right? It's fun. Great stuff in AI. Woohoo! I like talking about that because if you're thinking ahead of time and you're thoughtfully, we are going to be in a relationship at some point in the future. 20, 200, 2000, whatever. But someday. And so I'd rather enter that relationship in a thoughtful way, kind of figuring out what we think that relationship would do that would benefit all involved. And so yes, I rather hope, rather than the doomsday Terminator scenario, that we find our way into a very good symbiotic relationship.
Even beyond that, the internet is literally like a filter of human experience. So you're saying they're going to gather all of human experience and internalize it. It'd be very difficult for them to separate themselves from that experience and not somehow sympathize if they develop that.
Yeah. I don't pretend to know what that training will look like. Partially just kind of throwing out, some interesting scenarios for fun or for comment or whatever. I don't know if any of this is real, and I don't know what form or shape it will. And there's nobody on the planet that knows that. But I threw out these scenarios just to say, at least I want to think about that now. And, and I invite you to say, Chris, you're absolutely wrong. I think you're full of it. I can't believe Honeywell hired you. But let's have the conversation. Somebody was raising their hand?
Yeah, I was just going to say, anyone sort of interested in this sort of thought experiment needs to read The Rational Optimist. It's a book, and you go through a lot of sort of human history of worrying about these sorts of things in the short term when we have very little data on their negative. We have very little actual data on their negative experience over longer periods of time.
Yeah, this is definitely, my previous two sessions today, were kind of backed by reality. This one definitely is not, I hope.
I would wonder whether we would actually recognize this eventuality. In other words, as it happened, we would recognize it from here, but not from there.
Yeah, so this is another thing I commonly point out to people. People talk about the cyborg future, and all that. We're already there. We've been doing artificial hearts for decades. Think of all the implants. My mother jokes about being the cyborg because she has two artificial, shoulders from shoulder replacements, her hips, her knees. She's more machine than person in that way, and that's common these days in medicine. And so, but we don't think of it that way. We are already far down that curve, and there are already chips that support these devices that we think of in the most wonderful ways. They're already there. We're already moving down that curve, and we're not really thinking too much about it in that way. So yes, it tends to creep up on you when it's in the present. It's really having to look forward to the jump where you kind of go, wow, we've made it quite a long way when you really think about it. There's multiple. I'm going to come back to you just because you already said something. Yes?
We're working on the application of the AI to robots. So my question is...
We are too. We have something common there.
So I wanted to know your opinion. So based on current AI technologies,
Yes.
Is it possible to let a robot have free will?
You know what? I'm gonna cop out of that one, and say it's above my pay grade. I will say this. I won't discount it because it depends on how you want to define it and what you think makes free will arise in people. And that can be anywhere from a scientific explanation to a religious explanation. And so I would argue that we are machines, we're biological machines, and we have evolved over time. And I would say that that kind of evolution could happen in many different ways. Whether or not it is exactly whatever any of us in this room think of as free will, I'll leave to you. Yes, sir.
You are talking about this far away, time where artificial intelligence will be animated. But I think that one of the issues which we need to talk about is about use the methods and techniques kind of the much closer into like proper ethical way.
Yeah.
We can probably use the artificial intelligence to find the pattern which will help us to sell more Coca-Cola. But when you are talking about the tracing terrorists, this is synonym for the bad guys. And bad guys, for some people, they are very differently defined.
I agree.
That this is kind of the very close by problem.
And that's why I put the slide in on ethics in there. I mean, it's a wide open area. There is not a unified ethical framework. There's no one even close to having that applied. That AI Now organization is one of several out there that are trying to start putting some thought into that going forward. And I think that is a good idea for no other reason than it forces us to have this conversation. Go ahead, and then I'll go back to you next.
So it's interesting that you put out the video clip with drones. In 1953, Robert Sheffley wrote his short story, Watchbird. I don't know if you're familiar with it. In short, what he described there was exactly the idea of fighting crime. So he created, basically, humans created drones that killed people
who were about to kill other people, and what they ended up with was you wouldn't be able to swat a fly before getting killed. At which point the humans decided that, well, that's not a good idea, therefore they created other drones who were killing the first drones, and then those second drones decided that there were other creatures that they should also kill. So the problem, and then going back to your dog slide, the problem here, I think, is not necessarily the lack of ethics, but that, let's say, if the dog were to command a human to do something, no matter how smart the
My
dog
dog
is,
does that to me all the time, by the way.
you would have a real problem by having somebody with a lower intelligence command somebody with a higher intelligence, and what would happen with that. So if you could share your thoughts on that.
I don't know. I think you've run ahead of me on this one. I don't know that I have any on that. I would say I would argue that a potential flaw in that argument from that author is the idea of that lack of ability to discriminate there. You know, early on, you know, if you hit the fly, then you get killed. And I would argue that it is not, even by today's standards, that you can create deep learning systems that can sufficiently discriminate between those different behaviors and such. I mean, there's a lot of work going on in that area. So we might have, whereas I think it's a good thought to have, we might have outstripped the author of 1953 in that particular way. Maybe. Yes, sir?
Yeah, actually,
Oh.
I have the mic.
Oh,
I don't
whoever.
know if you've heard of Anthony Lewandowski, the former Google engineer who's founded a religious church that wants to create a super intelligent AI godhead.
Oh, no.
With hopes that the AI will be worshipped by humans and followers.
No, I hadn't run into that one quite
Yeah,
yet.
I just wanted to know, what your thoughts on that might be.
Boy. Whew. I don't think I even want to touch that. I will just say in matters religious, I'm probably the wrong person. I'm just going to leave it there. I'm probably the wrong person to comment. So it's probably not where I'm going to spend my Sunday mornings. I'll just say that.
Real quick. You wanted people to argue with you. So
Sure,
here's
argue.
an argument.
All right.
You're saying that the AI future is inevitable. One way I can see in which that does not happen is if there is an extinction-level nuclear war and we're unable to develop AI. So my argument is that extinction is more likely before the AI super horizon.
I just want to say, you just pointed out that global thermonuclear war is the best outcome.
I mean, there will be no humans, but there will also be no more unethical treatment of humans. So, there's good and bad.
There you go. No, and actually, I will acknowledge that. So I'm hoping that we can manage the relationship without going quite to that level. But thank you. I appreciate that.
So I see you all the time, so I can ask you my question.
He's part of the Atlanta Deep Learning Network, Deep Learning Meetup, which you guys are all invited to, by the way.
I wanted to thank you. One thing I really liked about your talk is you talked about the benefit side, and I've seen about 15 of these things this past year, and that's kind of a third element. People ever thinks of like the merger of AI. People think about the AI killing us, but they don't think of like the benevolent side. And I wanted to thank you for actually talking about that part.
You're very welcome. Come on, beat me up. Come on.
Chris, last question.
Okay, last question. Here we go.
You mentioned the word sentience in general, and what I'm curious about is, do you feel that we will reach a level of mechanical sentience before we reach along the lines of the work we do on the biological side, where we're doing cloning, we're doing genetic splicing, and really developing another sentient being through those means?
So I'm going to halfway evade your question, and because I'm going to say I am not a neuroscientist. I'm someone who loves reading up on that as a layman in a sense, but I know my limitations, and I'm not going to speculate. But in a broader sense, and there's something I've alluded to a few minutes ago, is that fundamentally as biological creatures, and I'm setting for the moment, I'm setting aside whatever your religious conviction may be, and I'm talking from a scientific perspective, okay? So allow that. We're still kind of machines. We're biological machines, and the things that happen in terms of how we evolve happens, at least within the scope of life that we know here on Earth, it happens a lot and over again. It's not magic. And so as a non-neuroscientist, I would argue that sentience itself is a form of that evolution. It is a biological, scientific, chemical, electrochemical process that gets there. The specifics of that, I'm not going to even try to attend, but that's my gut feeling personally. And so I think it's just I think that anything we can do in a biological sense that way, we can probably do in a non-biological. It's just there are a lot of parallels there. So I don't know. I don't know when and how and what order. I don't even pretend to have a clue on that. I just think that it's science at the bottom. Maybe as the final thing I'll say here, it's science at the end of the day, and we've made great advances. We're likely to continue to make great advances, and I think these are things that are doable in some time frame, which I don't know what is. That's it. Thank you very much for coming.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chris.